Oh no, who is the father of this baby?
The bathroom light flickered once before it settled. A small white stick sat on the edge of the sink, the kind of object that changes everything in under 3 minutes. She stood in front of the mirror, hands gripping the cold porcelain, staring at her own reflection like she was looking at a stranger. 2 lines. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. From the living room she could hear them. Her husband Juhan and his best friend Sungo laughing. Glasses clinking. The television playing something neither of them was really watching. 2 men. 1 baby. And she didn't know which one of them had given it to her. She pressed her back against the wall and slid down slowly until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, knees pulled to her chest, the test still in her hand. And in that moment, the worst part wasn't the pregnancy. The worst part was the memory that came flooding back, of the night it happened, of how gentle he had been, of how she had cried after, of how she had told herself it would never happen again. And then, even worse than that memory, came another one. Her husband's voice just 3 days ago, beaming with pride on the phone. "My wife is pregnant." And Sungo's face, the flicker of something across his eyes that she hadn't understood then. She understood it now. She just didn't know yet how deep the lie went. It started the way most quiet disasters do. Slowly and without warning. There was no argument. No cold silence after a fight. No moment she could point to and say, that's when everything changed. One day Juhan simply stopped. He stopped reaching for her hand across the dinner table. Stopped pulling her close in the mornings before the alarm went off. Stopped looking at her the way he used to, like she was something worth looking at. Mira noticed the way women always notice. First with confusion, then with worry. Then with a quiet, gnawing ache that settled somewhere beneath her ribs and refused to leave. She told herself it was work stress. She told herself it was exhaustion. She told herself all the things a woman tells herself when the alternative is too painful to consider. He still loves me. He's just tired. This is normal. This is what marriage becomes. But month after month, the bed between them grew wider. Not physically. They still slept on the same mattress, under the same blanket. But there was a cold geography to the way they lay at night. Him facing the wall. Her facing the ceiling. An invisible line drawn down the center that neither of them ever talked about crossing. She would lie awake listening to his breathing, trying to figure out if he was asleep or just pretending. She never knew. On a Tuesday evening in October, she made his favorite meal. The spicy braised short ribs he had once told her reminded him of his mother's cooking. She set the table properly, lit 2 candles, changed into a dress she hadn't worn since their last anniversary. He came home, dropped his bag, looked at the table. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. Then he sat down and ate in silence, scrolling through his phone. She sat across from him, watching the candles burn. Later that night, she lay beside him and pressed her palm gently against his back. Small touch. Almost nothing. He shifted away in his sleep. Or pretended to. She pulled her hand back. Stared at the ceiling. 11 months, she thought. 11 months since he last touched me like I was his. She didn't cry that night. She had gotten past crying. What replaced the tears was something quieter and more dangerous. A hollow feeling that followed her from room to room, like a shadow with no source. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the silence wasn't indifference. It was shame. And shame, left alone long enough, will do things to a man that even he doesn't fully understand. But Mira would learn all of that later. First she would make a mistake. A small one, she thought. A drunk one, she would tell herself. Just a message sent to the wrong person on a lonely Wednesday night. Just that. And it would unravel everything. Juhan left on a Thursday morning. 2 suitcases. A work trip. 3 days in Busan for a conference he had mentioned only the night before, casually, like an afterthought. Like she was someone who didn't need much notice. Like she was someone who would simply adjust. "I'll be back Sunday," he said, zipping his bag. He didn't ask if she would be okay. He didn't kiss her goodbye. He rolled his suitcase to the front door, slipped on his shoes, and paused for just a second with his hand on the door handle. She stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug warm between both palms, watching him, waiting. For what, she didn't know anymore. Look, maybe. A single look that said, I see you. I still see you. He opened the door. Lock up properly, he said. And then he was gone. Mira stood in the silence he left behind. The coffee went cold in her hands. The first day alone wasn't so bad. She kept herself busy the way she always did when the emptiness threatened to swallow her whole, cleaning things that were already clean, reorganizing shelves that were already organized, cooking a full meal for one person and then eating half of it standing over the sink because sitting at the table alone felt like too much of an admission. She texted Juhan once that afternoon. Arrived safely. He replied 4 hours later. Yes. One word. She stared at it for a long time before setting her phone face down on the counter. The second day was harder. She woke up to an apartment that felt too large for one person. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind that presses against your ears and reminds you of everything that isn't there. She called her mother for an hour. Laughed at the right moments. Said everything was fine. She wasn't fine. She scrolled through old photos on her phone in the afternoon. Her and Juhan from 2 years ago. A trip to Jeju, a weekend where he had held her hand every time they walked anywhere, where he had pulled her close in the water and kissed her forehead and called her his favorite person. She remembered the exact way the wind had felt that day. The exact way he had looked at her. She put her phone away before she could spiral further. But the spiral had already begun. By Saturday night, the third night, Mira was unraveling at the seams. She had done everything right. She had stayed busy. She had eaten. She had showered. She had watched 2 episodes of a drama she couldn't focus on and read 4 pages of a book she couldn't absorb. But the night had come anyway. And with the night came the weight of everything she had been carrying for 11 months with nowhere to put it down. She opened a bottle of red wine. Just 1 glass, she told herself. She poured it and sat on the couch in the low light, knees tucked under her, the television on mute, the city humming quietly outside the window. 1 glass became 2. 2 became 3. And somewhere in the soft, warm blur of the third glass, the wall she had built around herself, brick by careful brick, month after patient month, began to crack. Tears came quietly. They always came quietly with her. No warning. No build-up. Just a sudden wetness on her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away because there was no one to see her anyway. 11 months. 11 months of reaching across the bed and finding only cold space. 11 months of making herself smaller, quieter, less needful. Of swallowing every question and every ache, because she didn't want to seem like too much. 11 months of lying beside her husband and feeling lonelier than she had ever felt in her entire life. She missed being touched. Not even in a passionate way, just touched. A hand on her shoulder. Fingers brushing hers. The simple, animal comfort of another person's warmth saying you are here. You are real, you are not invisible. She reached for her phone. She wasn't thinking clearly. The wine had softened her edges, blurred the careful boundaries she kept around her own pain. She opened her messages with the intention of doing something she had never allowed herself to do before. Just say it. Just tell him the truth, plainly and without armor. She was tired of pretending she wasn't hurting. She started to type, slow at first. Then faster, the words coming the way tears come. Once they start, they don't stop. I miss your touch. I don't know how else to say this anymore. It's been 11 months. 11 months and I don't know what I did wrong. I don't know when I stopped being someone you wanted to be close to. I feel invisible in my own marriage. I feel like a stranger sleeping beside my husband. I miss feeling like I'm yours. Miss you. I miss us. She read it back once. Her chest ached. She pressed send. Then she exhaled, long and shaky, and dropped the phone onto the cushion beside her and pressed both hands over her face. It was done. It was out. Whatever he did with it, at least she had finally said it. She reached for her wine. Her phone vibrated. She stopped. He never responds this fast. Juhan took hours to reply to a simple question about dinner. He had read her emotional texts before and waited until morning to acknowledge them, if he acknowledged them at all. There was no version of reality in which he saw that message and responded within 30 seconds. She picked up the phone slowly, looked at the screen, and the name she saw there pulled the floor out from under her. Not Juhan. Sungo. The room seemed to tilt. She sat forward, suddenly very sober, and scrolled up with fingers that had gone cold. Her message, every raw, humiliating, heartbroken word of it, was sitting inside Sungo's chat. Not Juhan's. Their names were close together in her contacts. She had opened the wrong one. She had been 3 glasses of wine deep and crying and not paying attention, and she had sent it to Sungo, Juhan's best friend. The man who looked at her like he was reading a book he wasn't supposed to have access to. Whoa. No. Her eyes dropped to his reply. 6 words. Just 6 words, sitting on the screen like a lit match held over something flammable. Give me one night. I'll make you feel like a woman. She couldn't breathe. She read it again. Then again. The words didn't change. Her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her throat. She typed back immediately, fingers clumsy and desperate, making 3 typos before she got the words right. I'm so sorry. That was meant for my husband. Please ignore it. I'm sorry. She hit send. Then she sat perfectly still, phone gripped in both hands, staring at the screen. The 2 gray ticks appeared. Delivered. She waited for them to turn blue. They didn't. She waited for the 3 dots that would mean he was typing. They never came. Nothing. Just her message sitting there, and his reply sitting above it, and the quiet of the apartment pressing in around her like something with weight. She put the phone down on the coffee table and stood up. Walked to the window. Stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the city lights below. He was probably just being provocative, she told herself. It was a joke. Stupid, inappropriate joke. Men like Sungo thought things like that were funny. It didn't mean anything. She almost believed it. She stood at that window for a long time, breathing slowly, willing her heartbeat to settle back down into something normal. Her phone sat silent on the table behind her. Sungo never replied. That should have made her feel better. Somehow it made her feel worse. She didn't sleep well that night. She lay in the center of the bed, the whole bed hers for once, and she hated it, and stared at the ceiling and told herself the same thing over and over until it felt almost true. It was nothing. Forget it. It was nothing. She almost managed it. What she couldn't know, lying there alone in the dark, in a marriage she didn't understand, in a silence with no explanation, was that Sungo's lack of reply wasn't indifference. It was patience. And patience, in the hands of the wrong person, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Before Sungo, there was just the silence. And before the silence, there was a version of her marriage that Mira still visited sometimes. In the quiet between sleeping and waking, in the space before full consciousness arrived and reminded her of what things had become. She visited it less and less now. But it still came to her sometimes, unbidden. A flash of warmth in the middle of a cold season. It had started, the pulling away, the slow disappearance of him, about a year ago. She hadn't noticed it immediately. That was the cruelest part. It didn't happen overnight, the way a door slamming shut happens. It happened the way a tide goes out. Gradually, so gradually that you don't realize how far the water has receded until you're standing on dry sand wondering where the ocean went. The first time she tried to reach for him and felt the distance, she told herself she was imagining it. It was a Friday night. They had eaten dinner, cleaned up together the way they always did. Her washing, him drying, easy and comfortable. She had felt good that evening. She had changed into the silk slip she saved for nights when she wanted him to look at her a certain way. And she had come to where he was sitting on the bed reading. And she had placed her hand on his chest and looked at him. He had glanced up from his book, then back down. I'm tired, Mira. She had pulled her hand back slowly. Okay, she said. She lay down beside him and stared at the ceiling and told herself. He's tired. He works hard. Just tonight. But it was the next night too. And the night after that. A week passed. Then 2. She stopped wearing the silk slip. She told herself she was giving him space, giving him time, being a considerate wife who understood that marriage ebbed and flowed, and she was not going to be the kind of woman who made her husband feel pressured. But the ache was already beginning. Small and low, like an ember that hadn't yet decided whether to die or grow. 3 weeks in, she tried again. Softer this time. Less direct. She moved close to him on the couch after dinner, tucked herself against his side the way she used to, tilted her face up toward his. He patted her knee. Once. The way you pat a dog that has come to sit beside you. Then he picked up his phone and started scrolling. She sat very still. Joo-hun. Are you okay? Is something wrong? He looked at her then. Brief look. Patient. Slightly puzzled, as though she had asked him something mildly inconvenient. Nothing's wrong. Why do you always do this? Do what? Make things into something. I'm just relaxing. Can't I just relax? She opened her mouth, closed it. Of course, she said. She moved back to her own side of the couch. He kept scrolling. She tried to talk to him about it properly once. Just once. She had rehearsed it in her head for 3 days before she found the courage, choosing her words carefully, making sure she sounded calm and loving rather than accusatory. She waited until a Sunday morning when there was nowhere to be, no reason to rush, the apartment full of soft gray light and the smell of coffee. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and folded her hands around her mug and said, quietly, I feel like something has changed between us. I feel like you're far away from me and I don't know why. I miss being close to you. Joo-hun looked at her from across the table. Long look. Then he leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand over his face, and when he lowered it, his expression was the particular combination of tired and gentle that she had learned to dread, the one that meant she was about to be managed rather than heard. Mira, I'm going through a stressful period at work. That's all this is. It's been months, Joo-hun. I know how long it's been. The sharpness in his voice stopped her. He softened it immediately, looking at his coffee. I just need you to be patient with me. You're overthinking this. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. She looked at her husband across the breakfast table. This man she had chosen, this man she had built a life with, this man who was sitting 3 feet away from her and somehow unreachable, and she nodded. Okay, she said. She didn't bring it up again. What she did instead was carry it. Quietly. Alone. She carried the rejection like something she deserved, turned it over and over in her hands at night looking for the explanation she could never find. Was she too much? Not enough. Had she done something, said something, become someone he no longer wanted without realizing it had happened? She started watching herself in the mirror with a critical eye she had never turned on herself before. Studying her own face for flaws, her own body for reasons. Is this why? Is it this? By the time 11 months had passed, she had stopped asking. She had grown used to the shape of her own loneliness the way you eventually grow used to a scar. It was just part of her now. Just the temperature of her life. She had accepted it. She had made a terrible mistake in accepting it. Joo-hun came back from Busan on a Sunday evening. He came through the door looking rested, almost relaxed, lighter than he had seemed in months. He dropped his bag, washed his hands, and ate the dinner she had kept warm without saying much. But he said thank you when he finished. He even touched her shoulder briefly as he passed her on the way to the bathroom. She told herself it was something. She held on to it. The next 3 days were almost normal. Not warm, not what they once were, but functional. Civil. He came home at a reasonable hour. They watched television in the same room. He answered her questions in full sentences. She was almost comfortable. And then, on Wednesday evening, Joo-hun looked up from his phone with a particular expression of a man who has already decided something and is now simply informing someone else of it. I told Sungo to come over this weekend, he said. Saturday. We'll eat, have some drinks, relax. It'll be good. Mira kept her eyes on the television. Her pulse, however, did something she didn't ask it to do. This Saturday, she said. Even. Is that a problem? No, she said. Of course not. She looked back at the screen. The characters on the show kept moving, kept talking. She didn't hear a word of it for the rest of the episode. She spent Saturday preparing in the way she always did when guests came. Too thoroughly, too carefully, channeling her nervous energy into tasks that had clean, measurable endings. She marinated the meat in the morning. She set the table properly. She changed her outfit twice, then felt absurd about it and changed back into the first one. He is your husband's friend, she told herself firmly, standing in front of the mirror. He is nothing. What happened was a drunk mistake and an inappropriate text and nothing more. You will be normal tonight. She was going to be completely normal. The doorbell rang at 7. She heard Juhan get it. Heard the easy, immediate warmth of two old friends greeting each other. The kind of natural, effortless comfort that she and Juhan hadn't had between them in almost a year. She stayed in the kitchen. Mira, Juhan called. He's here. She picked up the dish towel, set it down, walked out. Sungo was standing in her living room in a dark jacket, a bottle of wine in one hand, looking completely at ease. The way men who are comfortable everywhere always look completely at ease. He turned when she entered, and he looked at her. Not the way men look at the wives of their friends, the brief, polite, acknowledging glance that says, hello, you exist, I see you. He looked at her the way you look at something you have thought about in the time since you last saw it. And hurried, like he had time. Mira, he said. It's good to see you. You too, she said. She turned to take the wine from him and walked back to the kitchen. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. Dinner was the most exhausting performance of Myra's life. On the surface, it was pleasant. The food was good. Juhan was in better spirits than he'd been in months, talking easily, laughing at Sungo's stories, pouring drinks with a generosity she had almost forgotten he possessed. She played her part. She smiled at the right moments. She answered questions, passed dishes, refilled glasses. But underneath the performance, she was exquisitely, uncomfortably aware of Sungo in a way she couldn't shut off no matter how hard she tried. He was careful about it. That was the thing that unnerved her most. He wasn't obvious. He wasn't the kind of man who stared openly and made things awkward. He was precise. A glance that lasted 3 seconds too long when Juhan was looking down at his plate. A question directed at her just as she had decided he had forgotten she was there. A quality of attention that was completely invisible to her husband but completely visible to her, as though it were a frequency only she could hear. She reached for her wine. Under the table, something pressed against her foot. She went very still. It was light, barely anything. The side of his shoe against hers. Not aggressive, not demanding. Just there. A small, deliberate contact that said, I know you're sitting across from me and I haven't forgotten. She moved her foot away. Kept her eyes on Juhan, who was in the middle of a story about a colleague. Laughed at the right moment. Reached for her glass again. Her breathing was not normal. She hated that her breathing was not normal. She excused herself after the main course. Dishes, she said, just clearing a few things, and retreated to the kitchen with an armful of plates and the specific relief of a person who has been holding themselves together in a room and finally gets to stop. She set the plates down and stood at the sink and ran the water cold and pressed her wrists under it. Stop it, she told herself. Stop this right now. He's a man at a dinner table. You are a married woman in your own home. The water ran over her wrists. From the dining room, she could hear Juhan laughing. She was so tired of the sound of her husband laughing at everything except her. She heard footsteps. She straightened up immediately. Turned the tap off. Picked up the dish towel. Sungo appeared in the kitchen doorway. He leaned against the frame with his wine glass, unhurried, looking at her with that expression she was starting to recognize, the one that said he had all the time in the world and intended to use it. You don't have to do all that now, he said. I don't mind, she said. She kept her back mostly to him, rinsing a glass that was already clean. Then footsteps. He was moving into the kitchen. She kept her eyes on the sink. He stopped a few feet behind her. She could feel the particular weight of his presence the way you feel a change in temperature. Something in the air that wasn't there before. You deserve to feel wanted, Mira. Her hands went still under the water. The words landed somewhere they had no business landing. She knew that. She recognized exactly what was happening and exactly why she needed to turn around and tell him to go back to the table and exactly why this conversation needed to end immediately. He turned around. He had moved closer than she expected. Not threatening. Never threatening with him, she was learning. Always this careful studied closeness that kept him just on the right side of a line he was slowly erasing. "You need to go back out there," she said. He didn't move. "He doesn't see you," Sungo said quietly. Matter of fact. Not cruel, somehow that made it worse. "I don't know why. But I do. Sungo." He took one step closer. She put her hand flat against his chest and pushed. Firmly, clearly, a boundary with no ambiguity in it. He stopped. "If he won't make you feel like a woman," he said, his voice low and even, "I will." The words sat in the kitchen between them. She held his gaze. "Get out of my kitchen," she said. "Right now." Moment. Long enough to make her heart pound. Then he stepped back. Nodded once, almost respectfully. Picked up his wine glass from where he'd set it on the counter. And walked back out to her husband. Mira stood in the kitchen alone. She turned back to the sink. Turned the tap on. Pressed both palms flat on the cool edge of the counter and breathed. From the dining room, she heard Juhan say something and Sungo laugh in response. Easy, warm, completely unbothered. She stood there for a long time. Telling herself she had handled it. Telling herself it was over. Not yet knowing that Sungo was not a man who gave up. He was a man who waited. 2 weeks passed after the dinner. Mira filled them carefully. The way you fill cracks in a wall before anyone notices them. Smoothing over the surface until everything looks intact again. She went about her days with the particular discipline of a woman who has decided something did not happen. She cooked. She cleaned. She went to work and came home and sat beside her husband on the couch and watched television and said the right things at the right times. She did not think about the kitchen. She did not think about the 6 words Sungo had said to her, low and even, like he was simply stating a fact about the weather. She did not think about the way her heart had behaved at dinner, the traitorous, involuntary way it had responded to a man she barely knew while her husband sat 3 feet away laughing at a story. She did not think about any of it. She was very, very busy not thinking about it. Juhan told her on a Monday. Another trip. 2 nights. Tuesday through Thursday. Seoul this time, not Busan. A meeting he couldn't reschedule with people he couldn't disappoint. "I'll be back Thursday evening," he said, folding shirts into his bag with the focused efficiency of a man already halfway gone. "Okay," she said. She had stopped asking if she could come. She had stopped filling the silences with suggestions and questions and reaching. She had learned, across 11 months of careful, painful education, that the most dignified thing she could do was simply accommodate. "Okay," she said again and went to finish making dinner. Tuesday passed without incident. She worked. She came home. She heated up leftovers and ate them standing at the counter and watched half an episode of something she couldn't concentrate on and went to bed. She texted Juhan once. "How was the meeting?" He replied 2 hours later. "Long fine. Sleep well." She stared at those 4 words for longer than she should have. Then she turned off the lamp. Wednesday night was when it happened. She had been asleep. Finally, genuinely asleep, the kind of heavy unconscious sleep that only came to her in the middle of the week when exhaustion overrode anxiety. She was deep in it when a sound pulled her up through the layers. A sound from inside the apartment. She lay still for a moment, blinking in the dark, unsure if she had dreamed it. The apartment was quiet. The city hummed its usual low hum outside the window. Then she heard it again. A low creak somewhere near the front door. Followed by silence. Followed by what might have been nothing or might have been footsteps. She couldn't be certain. He sat up. Her heart was going faster than it had any reason to. She told herself it was the building settling. Old buildings made sounds. She had lived here for 3 years and it made sounds and she knew that, she knew it, and yet, another sound. Different this time. Like something shifting. She reached for her phone with a hand that was not entirely steady and turned on the flashlight and pointed it at nothing. At her own empty bedroom, at the familiar shapes of her own furniture. Nothing. But the feeling didn't leave. She dialed Juhan before she'd fully decided to. Rang 4 times. 5. She was already composing the voicemail in her head. "Sorry, never mind, I'm being ridiculous," when he picked up. "Mira." His voice was thick with sleep. "What is it?" "I heard something," she said. She heard how small her voice sounded. In the apartment. I don't know, it's probably nothing. Mira. Was. She heard him exhale. Heard the particular quality of a man recalibrating in the dark. I can't come home right now. I know. I know that, I wasn't asking you to. I'll call Sungo. The words dropped into the conversation like a stone into water. Juhan, no, I don't need. He's 20 minutes away. He'll check the apartment. Go back to sleep. I'm fine, I don't need. But he had already hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her lap and the flashlight still on, casting a white circle on the opposite wall. No, she thought clearly. Well, call him back. Tell him you're fine. Tell him you don't need anyone. She pulled up Juhan's name, stared at it, put the phone down. The apartment was very quiet. She sat in the middle of that quiet for 18 minutes, she counted, before the doorbell rang. She opened the door. Sungo stood in the hallway in a dark gray pullover, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had been awake rather than one who had been woken. His eyes moved past her into the apartment first, a quick assessing sweep, then came back to her face. You're okay, he said. It wasn't really a question. I heard something. It was probably nothing. Let me check. He stepped back. He came in. She stood in the center of the living room and watched him move through her apartment. Methodical, unhurried, opening the storage closet, checking the bathroom, the bedroom. He had an ease about him that should have unsettled her and instead, infuriatingly, made her feel the first genuine sense of safety she had felt all evening. He came back to the living room. Nothing, he said. Building noise. You're safe. I told you it was nothing. You called your husband at midnight. It wasn't nothing. She looked at him. He looked back. The apartment was very quiet around them. You can go, she said. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry for waking you. He didn't move toward the door. You look exhausted, he said. I'm fine. When did you last sleep properly? She opened her mouth to answer and found, with a humiliation she hadn't braced for, that she couldn't remember. She genuinely could not remember the last night she had slept through without waking up sometime in the dark, reaching for a warmth beside her that wasn't there. Something in her face must have said what her mouth wouldn't. Sungo moved to the couch. Sat down. Not close to her. On the other end, at a careful distance. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at her with an expression that had none of the charge of the kitchen, none of the deliberate tension of the dinner table. He looked at her like a person looking at another person. Sit down, Mira. She didn't want to. She sat down. He didn't say anything immediately. The silence between them was different from Juhan's silences. Juhan's silences always felt like closed doors. This one felt like something else. Like space being made. He doesn't know how to be present, Sungo said eventually, quietly. Juhan. He never has. Even when we were younger. She didn't respond. That's not an excuse, he said. I'm not making excuses for him. He paused. You shouldn't have to call your husband at midnight and feel like you're inconveniencing him. The accuracy of it, the precise, devastating accuracy of that sentence, hit her somewhere unguarded. She felt her eyes fill. She looked away, pressed her lips together hard. I'm fine, she said for the third time. I know, he said. You're always fine. And something about the way he said it, not unkindly, not with pity, just with the simple recognition of a pattern, broke something open in her chest that had been sealed for a very long time. She didn't mean to cry. She had become quite good, over 11 months, at not crying in front of people. She had developed the internal architecture for it. The hard swallow, the sealing glance, the redirect. She had the system and it worked. Didn't work. The tears came without permission and she pressed her hand over her mouth and turned her face away, but it was already happening, quietly and completely, the way it always did with her. Not dramatic, just real. She felt the couch shift. He moved closer. He didn't say anything. Didn't offer platitudes or solutions or the particular brand of uncomfortable helplessness that men often produced in the face of a crying woman. He just put his hand over hers. Warm. Steady. She should have pulled away. She had pulled away in the kitchen. She had been strong in the kitchen, clear and direct and certain. But the kitchen had been daylight, and dinner, and witnesses. This was midnight. And she was alone. And she was so unbearably, completely tired of being strong in an empty apartment. She didn't pull away. What happened next, she would turn over in her mind for weeks afterward, examining it from every angle, looking for the exact moment she could have chosen differently, the exact door she could have not walked through. She never found one single moment. It wasn't one moment. It was the accumulation of 11 months of silence. 11 months of a bed that had grown cold by degrees so small she hadn't felt it happening until she was already frozen. 11 months of making herself smaller, quieter, less needful. Of telling herself that wanting to be touched was too much to ask, that needing to feel wanted was weakness. It was a hand over hers in the dark. It was someone asking when did you last sleep properly and waiting for the actual answer. It was kindness, arriving in the wrong hands at the exact right moment. And sometimes, this was the part she couldn't forgive herself for, and couldn't pretend wasn't true. Sometimes that is enough. She let him hold her. And then she let him more than hold her. And the whole time, somewhere underneath the warmth and the closeness and the relief of finally not feeling invisible, there was a part of her standing very still and very cold, watching, knowing exactly what she was doing and knowing exactly what it would cost her. She did it anyway. Afterward, she lay in the dark and the full weight of it settled over her like something physical. Sungo lay still beside her, not sleeping. She could tell by his breathing. She stared at the ceiling. Then, slowly and without a sound, she began to cry. Not the way she had cried before. Not the quiet, leaking tears of loneliness. This was different. This came from a deeper place. From guilt and grief, and the particular devastation of a woman who has done something she cannot undo and already knows it. She didn't make a sound. Sungo reached over in the dark and rested his hand gently on her arm. She moved away. He didn't try again. You should go, she whispered. Pause. Mira, please. Another pause. Longer. Then the sound of him getting up. Getting dressed. Moving through her apartment in the dark. The front door opened. Closed. She lay alone in the center of the bed and pressed both hands flat over her face and breathed. This never happened, she told herself. This is the only time. It happened once and now it's finished and it will never happen again. She believed it. Juhan came home Thursday evening. She had cleaned the apartment twice. She had changed the sheets. She had remade everything, the surfaces, the atmosphere, herself, until there was nothing to see. She was good at surfaces. She had been maintaining one for almost a year. He came in, dropped his bag, kissed her cheek, briefly, distractedly, and asked what was for dinner. He told him. Afterward he sat beside her on the couch and put on a show she had already seen and didn't tell him so, and at one point, somewhere in the second episode, he reached over without looking at her and put his hand on her knee. She looked at his hand on her knee. 11 months. She covered it with hers. That night, for the first time in nearly a year, Juhan reached for her in the dark. She told herself it was what she had been waiting for. What she had wanted. She told herself it meant something was changing, something was returning, that maybe the long silence was ending and this was the beginning of something better. She held on to him and told herself all of it. 3.5 weeks later, Mira stood in the bathroom with a small white stick in her hand. She had been telling herself for 4 days that she was overreacting, that the nausea was stress, that the exhaustion was just the particular weight of a life she had been carrying alone for too long, that she was fine. She was always fine. She read the test. 2 lines. She read it again. The lines didn't change. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub, slowly, the test still in her hand, and she tried to breathe the way you're supposed to breathe when the world has just rearranged itself around you without warning. The math was simple and merciless. Juhan, after 11 months, had reached for her 3.5 weeks ago. Sungo had been here 4 weeks ago. She stared at the 2 lines. Her hands were shaking. From the living room she could hear the television. Juhan was home. He was 3 rooms away, watching something with the volume slightly too loud, completely unaware that his wife was sitting on the bathroom floor with a positive pregnancy test and a secret that could destroy everything. She pressed the test against her chest. closed her eyes. Whose? The question sat in the center of her like a stone. Whose child is this? She didn't know. She genuinely, terrifyingly did not know. She hid the test in the bathroom cabinet. Behind the spare towels, underneath a folded washcloth, tucked away with the careful, practiced hands of a woman who had become very good at concealing things. She wrapped it in tissue paper first, then stepped back and looked at the cabinet door like it might betray her. She didn't know what she was going to do yet. She needed time. She needed to think, clearly, without panic, without the particular static that had been filling her head since she read those 2 lines and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She needed to sit with the reality of it long enough to figure out what came next. What she did not need was for Joo-hun to find it before she had figured that out. He found it on a Saturday morning. She was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard him moving around in the bathroom. The ordinary sounds of a man going about his morning, the tap running, the cabinet opening. Then silence. A different kind of silence than the kind she had grown used to. Not the habitual, hollow silence of their marriage. Something charged. Something that had weight. She set the coffee down. "Mira." His voice came from the bathroom doorway. She turned around slowly. He was standing there with the test in his hand. Tissue paper peeled back, the 2 lines fully visible. His face was doing something she hadn't seen it do in so long that for a moment she almost didn't recognize it. He looked stunned. Then his face cracked open into something she had no word for. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and she barely had time to process what was happening before his arms were around her. Both arms, fully, pulling her against his chest with a completeness of grip that he hadn't used in 11 months. He lifted her slightly off the ground. She felt his whole body shake. "Mira," he said again into her hair. His voice was completely different now, stripped of its usual careful management, raw in a way she hadn't heard since the early years. "Mira, you're..." He pulled back, held her face in both hands. His eyes were wet. She stared at him. "You're pregnant," he said, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "We're going to have a baby." She couldn't speak. "How long have you known? When did you? Why didn't you tell me immediately?" He was laughing now, slightly breathless, still holding her face. "Why did you hide it, Mira?" "I just found out," she managed. Her voice came from very far away. "I didn't know how to." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then pulled her back against him and held her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, fast and real and present in a way she had forgotten his heart could be. "My strong woman," he said quietly over her head. "My incredible, strong woman." She stood inside his embrace. Her arms came up slowly and rested against his back. She stared at the kitchen wall over his shoulder, and she felt nothing that she was supposed to feel. He didn't put her down for a long time. When he finally stepped back, he kept his hands on her shoulders, kept his eyes on her face, searching it with an attention he hadn't paid her in almost a year. "Are you okay? How are you feeling?" "The nausea. I noticed you weren't eating properly last week. I should have asked." "I'm okay," she said. "You need to call a doctor. Today if possible, or Monday at the latest." "I'll come with you. Joo-hun. I want to be there." He said it firmly, without hesitation, like a man who has just remembered who he is supposed to be and has decided to be it immediately and completely. She looked at her husband's face, open and warm and shining with something she could only call joy, and she thought about what was hidden inside her. The question she couldn't answer. The math that didn't resolve cleanly no matter how many times she ran it. "Okay," she said. He kissed her again, her forehead, her cheek. Then he reached for his phone. She watched him dial with the particular speed of a man who cannot contain something and needs to release it into the world. Rang twice. "Sunggoya," he said, and his voice was the warmest she had heard it in as long as she could remember. "My wife is pregnant." She went very still. She watched her husband's face while he listened to whatever Sungo said on the other end of the line. Watched the smile. The slight moisture at the corner of his eye that he blinked away quickly, the way men do when they don't want to be seen feeling something. "I know," Joo-hun said into the phone. "I know. I can't." A short, overwhelmed laugh. "Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell her you said so. He hung up, turned to her with the smile still fully in place. He says congratulations. Mira looked at her husband. Thank you, she said. The weeks that followed were the strangest of her life. Juhan transformed. There was no other word for it. He simply became, almost overnight, a different version of himself. He came home earlier. He asked how she was feeling and waited for the full answer. He researched prenatal vitamins and left them on the kitchen counter with a glass of water. He put his hand on her back when they walked somewhere together, the way he used to, and he held it there. He touched her like she was something he didn't want to lose. She should have been happy. She pressed through each day with the discipline of a woman walking a tightrope, keeping herself balanced, keeping her face arranged correctly, receiving his tenderness without flinching. She told herself the same things in the same order every morning when she woke up. You don't know anything yet. There is nothing to confess. You will figure this out. You will be okay. She was not okay. She was terrified in a way that had no bottom to it, a free-falling kind of terror that she could not share with a single person on earth. And underneath the terror, twisting through it like a second current, was something she hated herself. It was a Thursday evening, 5 weeks after Juhan had found the test. He had texted her that afternoon to say Sungo was coming for dinner. Casual, no particular reason, just a meal between old friends. She had read the message twice. Then she had put her phone in her bag and gone to the bathroom at work and stood at the sink with the cold water running until she felt steady enough to go back to her desk. You can do this, she told herself. You have been doing this. She made dinner, set the table, did everything right. Sungo arrived at 7. He greeted her at the door with the same careful, measured quality he always carried, a warmth that never quite tipped into something that could be named. He had been like this every time she had seen him in the weeks since that night. Not cold, not guilty, not, as far as she could tell, anything other than the composed and attentive man he had always appeared to be. She didn't know how he did it. She couldn't look at him for more than a few seconds at a time without something lurching in her chest. Dinner was quiet. Juhan was talking about a project at work, something about a contract that had finally been approved, and Sungo listened and responded, and everything was normal, completely normal, a perfectly ordinary Thursday evening. She excused herself after dinner. Dishes, she said. She needed some air. She went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and let the hot water run over her hands and focused on breathing at a regular pace. The low sound of their voices came from the living room, and hurried. The easy rhythm of two men who had known each other so long they had settled into a language of their own. She turned the tap down slightly. Juhan's voice lower now, more private. The shift in register that meant something was no longer casual. I need to say it properly. She went still. She turned the tap off entirely. I don't know how to thank you, Juhan said. I couldn't have done this without you. You know that. Silence. Then Sungo's voice, quiet and even. She'll never know. The words moved through her like cold water. She set the dish towel down. She'll never know. What would she never know? Her feet moved without her deciding to move them. She crossed the kitchen to the doorway, stopped just before it, pressed against the wall, out of their sight line. Juhan again. His voice thick with something she had never once heard in it before. When the doctor told me I had, that I couldn't. A pause. A short, painful exhale. I didn't know how to tell her. Tried. I sat with it for months trying to find a way to say it, and I couldn't. I couldn't be the man who looked his wife in the eye and told her he could never give her a child. The wall was cold against her shoulder. Her mouth had gone completely dry. She would have stayed, Sungo said. I know, Juhan said. That's not. His voice cracked. That wasn't the point. The point was I couldn't live with the way she would have looked at me afterward. Knowing. Every day knowing. A long silence. So when you said you had an idea, Juhan continued, quieter now, I told myself I would hate it. That I would shut it down immediately. But you didn't. No. Barely a sound. I didn't. She pressed her hand flat against the wall. The trip to Busan, Sungo said. Not a question. I needed her to be alone. I knew she was struggling. I knew she was. A breath. You said one night would be enough, and I told myself I would never be able to live with what it meant, but I just... His voice broke entirely for a moment. I want a family. I want her to have what she wants. And I can't give it to her myself. Silence. Then Sungo again, low and steady. The emergency. The noise in the apartment. I arranged it, Juhan said simply. I called you before she did. I needed her to call me and I needed to send you. I needed her to feel. He stopped. I needed her to be in a place where she would. I know what you needed. And you. I know what I did. She couldn't breathe. She stood in the hallway with her back against the wall and her hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes wide and unblinking. The pieces were rearranging themselves behind her eyes with a velocity that made her dizzy. The Busan trip planned. The emergency arranged. The night Sungo had arrived with his warmth and his patience and his careful, devastating kindness. Orchestrated. Every word of it. Every moment of it. Questions. The hand over hers in the dark. All of it. Her husband had sent his best friend to her bed. Had planned it. Had engineered it. Had manufactured her loneliness and her vulnerability and her breaking point with the precision of a man who had weighed his own shame against her body and decided his shame was worth more. The 11 months of silence. Not indifference. Not distance. Shame. Calculated, cowardly, catastrophic shame. And the elaborate architecture of lies he had built around it to protect himself from ever having to look her in the eye and tell the truth. He had not trusted her with his weakness. He had trusted Sungo with her body instead. She stood in the hallway. From the living room came the quiet, settled sound of two men who believed they were alone. Her hand was still over her mouth. The baby turned over somewhere deep inside her. Or maybe that was just the feeling of everything she had believed about her life folding in on itself all at once. She stood perfectly still. And waited for the world to stop moving. It didn't stop. She didn't move for a long time. She stood in the hallway with her back against the wall and her hand pressed over her mouth and she let the truth finish arriving. All of it, every piece of it, settling into place with the cold, irreversible finality of a door being locked from the outside. She had thought in the kitchen that the worst moment was hearing the words. She was wrong. The worst moment was the one after, when the words stopped and the silence came and she understood, completely and without any remaining room for doubt, that this was real. That her husband had done this. That the man she had married, the man she had cooked for and worried about and made herself smaller for and cried over in bathroom floors, that man had looked at her loneliness and decided it was useful. That he had handed her like an object to his best friend, and called it love. She lowered her hand from her mouth. She straightened her back. She stepped into the living room. They were sitting across from each other. Juhan on the couch, Sungo in the chair by the window, 2 glasses of whiskey on the table between them. An ordinary scene. A scene she had walked into 100 times. They looked up when she entered. Juhan's face opened into the easy, reflexive smile he had been wearing since the pregnancy. The new warmth, the returned attention, the performance of a husband who had gotten what he needed and could afford to be generous again. The smile lasted exactly half a second. Then he saw her face. The smile died. Beside him, Sungo went very still. She stood in the center of her own living room and looked at them both. First Juhan, then Sungo, then back to Juhan, and she felt something move through her that she had no name for. Not rage. Not grief. Something older and colder than both of those. Something that lived in the part of a woman that has been underestimated one time too many and has finally, completely, stopped being surprised by it. Mira. How long, she said. Her voice was quiet. Shook slightly. She didn't try to stop it from shaking. The shaking wasn't weakness, she understood that now. It was the sound of something that had been very tightly held finally being released. Juhan stood up slowly. The way a man stands when he doesn't know what's coming but knows it's coming. Mira, let me explain. How long have you known? Not a question. Demand. The difference was something she felt in her own chest. The shift from a woman asking to be let in to a woman who has already walked through the wall. Juhan's jaw moved. His eyes went to Sungo for half a second. She saw it. Don't, she said. Don't look at him. Look at me. How long have you known you couldn't have children? A long silence. 4 years, he said. The number landed. 4 years. They had been married for 3. She had walked down an aisle toward a man who was already keeping this from her. She had made vows and built a life and spent 11 months lying awake in the dark wondering what she had done wrong. 11 months of shrinking herself, questioning herself, remaking herself, and he had known. For 4 years. Before she was even his wife. 4 years, she repeated. She heard her own voice from somewhere far away. Mira. So I was just, her voice broke. She pressed through it. I was just a womb to you. The words hit him. She watched them hit him, watched his face contract with something that might have been genuine pain, and found that she could not make herself care. No, he said, and his voice was desperate now, stripped of everything careful. No, Mira, that is not. I love you. I have always. You don't get to say that right now. He stopped. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she hadn't allowed herself to look at him in a very long time, without the protective layer of hope that had kept her from seeing clearly. You avoided me for 11 months, she said. 11 months, Juhan. Do you know what those months did to me? Do you know what I told myself every single night? I thought I was undesirable. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought I was losing my mind. Her voice cracked again and she let it crack. I sat across from you at that table every day and I made myself smaller and smaller trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And you knew. You knew the whole time. And you said nothing. I didn't know how. You didn't know how. She pressed her lips together. So instead you arranged this. You arranged all of it. He flinched. The trip to Busan, she said. You planned that. You made sure I'd be alone. He said nothing. The noise in the apartment. The emergency. You called him before I called you, didn't you? His silence was its own answer. You sent him to me, she said. You opened the door and pointed him in my direction, and then you waited. I wanted to give you a family. You wanted to save yourself. The words came out of her with the quiet force of something that has been true for a long time and is only now being spoken. You wanted to look at a child and believe the lie. You wanted to walk around as a husband and a father and never have to tell the truth. Never have to sit across from me and be honest. Never have to trust me with your weakness because you were too ashamed. She turned her head, looked at Sungo. He was sitting exactly where he had been when she walked in. He hadn't moved. He hadn't stood up or attempted to speak or offered a single word of explanation. He was looking back at her with an expression that she could not fully read. Not cold, not defiant. Something that might have been the closest thing to remorse she was ever going to get from him. She looked at him for a long moment. And you, she said softly. You sat at my table. You ate my food. You looked me in the eye and you. She stopped. Breathe. Was any of it real? Any of it? He opened his mouth. She shook her head. Don't. She didn't want to hear his voice right now. She didn't want the particular quality of his words, that careful, measured delivery that she had once, humiliatingly, found comforting. She didn't want him to say anything that would complicate the clarity she had just found. His silence, when it came, was its own kind of answer. And somehow, it hurt more than anything Juhan had said. Because Juhan had panicked and explained and reached and stumbled over himself trying to make her understand. That was the behavior of a man who was afraid of losing her. Sungo said nothing. And that was the behavior of a man who had never thought of her as his to lose. She had been a task, a thing to be handled. And he had handled her efficiently and gently. And now he sat in her living room chair and said nothing because there was nothing to say. She had been used by someone who hadn't even bothered to lie to himself about it. She looked away from him, back to Juhan. You both smiled at me, she said. You ate at my table. You sat in my home. And you planned my body. The room was completely silent. Juhan's eyes were wet. She watched a tear move down his face and she felt it. Some distant, stubborn part of her felt it, and she thought, even now I feel the pull of caring about his pain. What a thing to discover about yourself. What a devastating, clarifying thing. She turned around and walked to the bedroom. She did not slam the door. She pulled it shut carefully, deliberately, the soft click of the latch the most controlled sound she had ever made. Then she stood in the center of her bedroom. Their bedroom, the room with a cold gap in the middle of the bed, the room where she had spent 11 months staring at the ceiling, and she looked at it all. The wardrobe, the dresser, the photographs on the shelf. She moved to the wardrobe and opened it and pulled out the suitcase from the back. She didn't think. Thinking would have undone her. She moved on instinct, opening drawers, folding things, placing them inside with a steadiness that surprised her. Her clothes, her documents, the small wooden box her mother had given her when she got married, filled with things she had considered precious. She packed them all. Behind her, the bedroom door opened. Mira. Juhan's voice. Broken. Barely holding its own shape. Mira, please. Please don't. Please just, let me explain properly. Let me. You had 4 years to explain, she said. She didn't turn around. I was afraid. I know. I was ashamed. I know that too. I love you. I have never stopped loving you. Everything I did, I know how it looks. I know what it was. But I did it because I couldn't bear to lose you. She stopped. Stood still with her hands resting on the edge of the suitcase. She let his words land properly. She gave them the consideration they deserved. She did not dismiss them. She had loved this man. She had built her entire adult life around him. She was carrying a child who was either his or his best friend's, and she still did not know which, and possibly never would. She let all of that be true at once. Then she turned around. Juhan was standing in the doorway. His face was the most open she had ever seen it. All the careful management stripped away, all the distance gone, just a man standing in the rubble of what he had built and looking at what it had cost. She looked at him steadily. You didn't trust me with your weakness, she said. But you trusted him with my body. The words fell between them. Juhan's face crumpled. She turned back to the suitcase, zipped it closed. She carried it herself. He followed her to the hallway, saying her name, saying please, saying just wait, saying all the things a man says when he finally understands that he has gone too far and come too late. She moved through his words the way you move through rain, feeling them, unable to stop them, unable to let them hold her in place. She passed the living room doorway. Sungo was standing now, his hands at his sides, watching her. She did not look at him. She picked up her bag from the hook by the door. Her keys. Where will you go? Juhan said. His voice was barely sound. Somewhere you didn't plan for me. She opened the front door. The hallway beyond it was quiet and ordinary. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, the faint smell of someone else's dinner. She stepped through. Pulled the suitcase behind her. The wheels made a soft rolling sound against the floor. Small and steady and real. She pressed the elevator button. Behind her, she heard Juhan step into the hallway. Mira. The elevator doors opened. She walked in. Turned to face front. For just a moment she could see him, standing in the hallway outside their apartment door, one hand raised, as though he was reaching for something he had already let go of a long time ago. And behind him, half in shadow, the shape of Sungo standing in the doorway. 2 men. Both silent now. She pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors slid closed. She stood alone in the elevator and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere she had been holding it for a very long time. She pressed her free hand flat against her stomach, gently, instinctively. A hand that said, I know you're there. Whatever you are, whoever you are, you know. Tears came. She didn't stop them. But she did not crumble, did not fold, did not become the kind of crying that overtakes you and leaves you on the floor. She stood upright with her suitcase beside her and her hand on her belly, and the tears moved down her face quietly, the way they always had with her. Not dramatic, just real. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. She walked through the lobby, past the security desk, through the glass doors and out into the night air, cold and clean and entirely indifferent to what she had just walked away from. She stood on the pavement. The city moved around her. Taxis, strangers. The ordinary machinery of a world that had not paused for a single moment while her life was being rearranged inside an apartment on the 6th floor. She looked up. Somewhere above her, 2 men were standing in a room that felt different now that she wasn't in it. She knew that. She knew the exact quality of the silence they were in right now. She had lived inside silences for 11 months. She knew all their textures. Let them sit in it. She looked back down, adjusted the suitcase handle in her grip, and she walked. 6 months later, Mira moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city, 3rd floor. 2 windows that caught the morning light. A kitchen just big enough for one person who had learned, slowly and without fanfare, that cooking for one was not the tragedy she had once believed it to be. She painted the nursery yellow. Not pink, not blue. Yellow, because yellow didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer yet. Yellow was simply warm, simply light, simply a color that said something good is coming without making any promises about what shape it would take. She didn't file for divorce immediately. She sat with it first, the way she had learned to sit with difficult things, without rushing toward resolution, without forcing herself to feel finished before she was finished. Her lawyer was a woman with sharp eyes and a quiet voice who listened to the whole story without interrupting once, and when Mira was done, said simply, "You have more options than you think." Mira was beginning to understand that. Juhan called every week. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she didn't. When she did, the conversations were careful. 2 people moving around the wreckage of something enormous, trying to find which pieces were still worth holding. He never made excuses anymore. He had stopped doing that somewhere around the 3rd week, as though he had finally understood that explanation was not the same as repair. He asked about the baby every time. She answered honestly every time. "Growing," she said. "Strong." Sungo she did not speak to. She had nothing to say to him that could be contained in language. And she suspected he knew that. Some debts cannot be negotiated. Some silences are the only honest response. She let that one stand. The baby came on a Wednesday morning in early spring. 7 pounds 4 ounces. A full head of dark hair. A cry that was, as the midwife put it, extremely confident for someone so new to the world. Mira lay in the hospital bed and held her daughter against her chest and looked at her face. This entirely new face, entirely her own, belonging to no one and nothing except the future, and felt something move through her that she had no word for yet. She thought she might spend the rest of her life finding the right word for it. She decided that was okay. She named her Seo. It meant, depending on who you asked, depending on the character you chose, a new beginning. She had chosen it very deliberately. Outside the hospital window, the city was doing what cities do. Moving, breathing, indifferent, alive. Spring light fell across the floor in long, pale rectangles. Someone down the hall was laughing. A phone rang and was answered. Mira looked at her daughter. So looked back, unfocused, blinking, trying to understand a world she had just arrived in. "It's okay," Mira told her quietly. "I'll figure it out as we go. We both will." She pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head, closed her eyes. "Breathe. Some betrayals don't break you. They strip you down to the part of yourself that was always there. Before the marriage, before the silence, before the 11 months of making yourself smaller in a bed that had grown too cold. The part that knows its own worth even when no one else is looking." Mira had found that part of herself on a hallway floor with a positive pregnancy test and a secret that could have destroyed her. She had carried it out of an apartment on the 6th floor, suitcase rolling, hand on her belly. She was still carrying it. And for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't carrying it alone. Fade to yellow.